You're listening to the Tye Pod, hosted by your friendly neighborhood PhD. This is Tye Martin, and I'm joined today by one of my very, very good friends, Marilyn, who is living in Texas in the Austin area, and she is a professor. And we actually met on Instagram about a year and a half ago, and we're lucky enough to meet at a conference in Santa Fe in person. So we've done quite a bit of work with like collaborative posting on different health issues that our families have dealt with, and yeah. And so I thought we'd have a little discussion on some higher education and some issues that we've dealt with and overcome there, and yeah, just go from there.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. And you've also come and talked to my classes before about different things too.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, we've been collaborating on some cool stuff. So do you want to, we're going to kind of do a back and forth question answer thing, but I'll let you go first if you want to with your initial question.
Okay, which are we doing, the shared question first or the sequence?
Yes, yeah. So actually, a little backstory on that too. So
Okay.
we basically agreed to share one question with each other that we wanted to discuss, and then we each brought a question that is a mystery that we're going to be sharing for the first time. So we'll start out with the ones that we were expecting.
Okay. So here's my question for Ty. What is your inner dialogue? Specifically, what dialogue plays in your mind that motivates you to keep going? A lot of times, we talk about like what a negative inner dialogue is, like what kind of negativity is playing in your head. But obviously, you have accomplished a lot in the face of great odds, and so I'm just wondering what sort of positive inner dialogue do you have?
Yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying that negative dialogue is something I've, continuously been fighting against, tried to be aware of, and I feel like I have conversations in my head when that starts happening, where you try to check yourself and be like, hey, is it really as bad as it seems? I'm like, is that one mistake? Is it gonna matter to anybody else but me? That one little tiny thing that I'm just like spending all this time worrying about. Um, so I think some of that is like I self-talk out of that space to start with, and then usually just like stop, like distract, find something that I don't have to even think about. But I mean, it has to keep my attention enough to get it off of the negative space. But I don't know, just I used to do like some gaming stuff, and now I kind of just tend to go hop on Instagram, check some reels or whatever, just something that diverts for a while, and then you can come back later, and usually it's minimized in my mind. um, and then obviously, like, you know friends, family, like I know you and I from time to time, we'll work through stuff and kind of talk to each other, and that helps so much, I think, because that whole intrinsic human nature thing is to, if we can share and have some kind of community where we can sort of vent and get things off our chest, I think is a big
And get it
deal.
out of your head too, right?
Exactly, yeah. So I mean, that's kind of how I start out with it. Yeah.
I I think that's really interesting that you didn't point out a positive inner dialogue. You talked about how you deal with the negative. And honestly, I wonder, does anybody have positive inner dialogue?
Maybe.
That really, I think you're so right. That's the key, is harnessing that negativity, dissecting it, taking it apart, talking
Yeah.
about it, getting it out of your head, questioning its validity. Yeah, that was a
So
really
it's a
good
matter of getting rid of the negative and starting with the positive. And I don't know, that like that's just, it's an unconscious, like you can't, or I can't control that. Like I don't just
right.
all of a sudden it pops in like, oh, positive dialogue time, you know.
Yeah.
And and I know that, in my past self, I was, tended to be over positive on the outside external, and then, over time you start to realize, well, that's not really real.
Right.
It's this perception thing when but then the negative, dialogue starts roaring,
Mm-hmm.
when you sort of
Yeah.
mask it. So yeah, that's kind of my approach there.
Yeah, kind of finding a way to be real about it, like,
Yeah,
and not hide it, because when you try to hide it, then it just kind of
it's
grows.
it's gonna smolder.
It
Yeah, yeah,
smolders. I like that word. Yeah.
yeah. um, yeah, I think that's kind of how I approach it. But um, and I don't know, did you want to like kind of answer your own a little bit, or how, do you want to go to the next
Honestly,
question?
my answer would be very similar to
Similar.
yours. I
Yeah.
have not replaced negative inner dialogue with positivity, but I have learned how to stop myself and do like what you said, start questioning, where is this coming from? Is it really that bad? And then, like, after I do that, maybe try talking about it with like somebody I trust,
Hmm.
like you, or,
Definitely.
you know, uh, and then and then it just kind of, you, like you said, distract yourself and go back to it, and it doesn't seem like that big of a deal.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it depends on who you talk to. Obviously, you said someone you trust, and it needs to be somebody that I think has that maybe a little bit of like objectivity, but still is in the end, supportive. Because if you go to the wrong person, that smoldering, I mean, they can give it some extra fuel and make it
Oh
worse.
yeah, I would
Yeah.
say I've learned with a few people. I would say probably my brother being one of them, is like, because he and I used to talk about everything, and then, you know later in life it was kind of like, oh, every time I talk to him about a problem, he kind of like rubs it in my face and makes me
Mhm.
feel stupid about it. So I don't do that anymore.
Right.
But
Right.
you know
And you start to figure out really quick, like, who can share with, because if you overshare with the wrong person, then there's just all kinds of negative like outcomes from that, and you don't come away, I mean, you
or
feel
sometimes some
worse.
people just start asking you a bunch of questions, or um
Or
and
like
that can
small talk questions almost, or like just
yeah, and that can kind of like make you feel misunderstood. It's like, okay, you're like asking me a bunch of questions, but I don't really feel like this is getting anywhere. Yeah, so I don't know.
and even more issues might show up because of that. So
For sure.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And then that, I think that's a good point, because that's what it does to me. Is I once I someone starts asking me a bunch of questions, then I start thinking about other things
right. And then
that
you,
I
you
could be
almost
upset about.
right, and then you kind of close down a little bit too, I think, with the conversation. It's just like,
Yeah.
no, I'm going to go back to repressing that for now. But
Yeah. It's like, oops, sorry, this was the wrong outlet. I'll just
exactly. Yeah.
shove it back inside of my soul. And
Yep. Yep. I'll just like tuck it back in there for a little bit before. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah. So mine's a little bit related.
Okay.
Um, but so my first one that I sent you is, how do you avoid burnout? Because I know you're, a new faculty member. You just defended not that long ago, and you have publications that are, waiting in the wings with reviews and that process. And then obviously, you have a child with health needs and concerns, and you need to be there for her as well. And thinking back on my time before I had all the gallbladder issues, I was balancing, juggling like so many hats. Like as a professor, you're doing research, writing, teaching. So I'm just curious, like, how have you managed to balance all of those things, and you're still moving forward, succeeding basically on all of those areas and doing well. But I'm just like, is there a strategy? Do you just kind of automatically do it? Like, how do you approach the whole burnout thing?
Well, I would say that burnout is kind of starting to hit me a little bit. Um, Even though I just started a new job, it's like residual burnout from the doctoral program, which I'm sure you understand. It's like
Yeah.
you're just kind of running on fumes and adrenaline for 4 years, and then it's like, oh, now I still have to keep doing all this crap. Like it's not over.
And in some ways, it's like you have all the old stuff, but now you're like layering with
Yeah, very, very well stated. Yeah, it's all the same stuff. It's like, and I think one thing, it's cool to talk to you because you really understand it. And some people do, but a lot of people are like, oh, you finished your dissertation. I guess you're never going to write anything ever again. It's like, you don't understand. This is like an ongoing thing.
well, it's like
Dissertation
the
is
question,
different.
like when are you going to defend? When do you finish? Like people
Yeah,
that don't understand, it's like,
that's never.
exact. That's the point, right? It's like you're
Yeah.
never done.
Or
Yeah.
like when people are like, oh, what was your dissertation about? I'm like, I'd rather not. Let's talk about something else.
Or
But
like,
yeah,
let me translate that with Chat GPT and make it, a little bit
a
less
little
daunting.
cerebral, right?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know that I have a really good answer for that because a lot of times, especially now, I really feel like I'm just on the fly constantly, like, oh, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? Like I try to
Yeah.
plan things. Since I've moved, I don't have any nursing help anymore, which has made things even harder.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, I definitely feel like I don't have any strategy. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how I wear many hats. I think one thing that I'm trying to do at my current job is to be more open about my daughter,
Hmm.
to talk to. At my previous job, I didn't tell anybody that I had a child with um, really complicated health needs. I was not, I don't I would say it goes back to that internalized ableism thing. Like I just didn't want people to think I was fishing for sympathy or that I was trying to shirk out of responsibilities. And the other thing is that it is a rare disease. No one's ever heard of it.
Hmm.
People just want to be like, well, but she's fine, right? And that irritates me. So I avoid the conversation altogether because it's like,
Right.
I don't want to be sitting there and be like, no, she's not fine, you idiot.
Mhm. Right, right. And it's almost like if you the fact that you're not wanting sympathy, you're not wanting people to kind of have that reaction, it's like, then when then they almost downplay it, right? Like they're almost like, well, she's fine then if you don't talk about it. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
no,
No,
you
because I
wouldn't
wear it well
understand if
doesn't mean it isn't heavy, right? We say that all
exactly.
the time. Um, but yeah, I'm trying to be more honest. And honestly, I think that the fact that I work with a smaller department and it's kind of like, hey, you guys are gonna know about this. And I don't care if you want to downplay it, go ahead. But I'm
Mhm.
gonna tell you the reality. Like, and I'm not going to be dramatic. And you might think I sound dramatic because, a couple of weeks ago, my daughter was struggling at 5 liters of oxygen. She was
Mhm.
still deteriorating in her sleep. Like that is a real thing that the people who I expect to respect me need to know stuff like they
Mhm.
need to know what I'm dealing with, just like I know what they're dealing with. Like I know that
True.
so and so had a colonoscopy last week or what.
And
You know
isn't
what I
that
mean?
strange? Like that kind of thing seems to happen like really frequently in the workplace. I feel like it's like, people kind of share their day-to-day drama basically, or like, things
Right.
like you said, the colonoscopy, but then like talking about, more complicated health needs, it's almost like, well, that's not something they like or feel comfortable with.
Right. So I am trying to break that silence in
Yeah.
my current position. And even with my students, I want them to know a little bit too. It's like you need to know who I am and the
Right.
things that I'm doing, not to the point where it's like, oh, let's just talk about Dr. whatever. Like, we're
Hmm.
not just talking about my personal life, but like,
Yeah.
if my kid's in the hospital, you're gonna know, I'm gonna tell you. Like, I'm not gonna
Right.
come to work and try to pretend like nothing's wrong because that's not sustainable.
Hmm.
It's not like living a lie like that and trying for other people to feel more um at ease or
Yeah.
less uncomfortable. It's like, nah, I'm done with that.
Right. Now that makes sense. I think that probably helps with the burnout too, because the less things that you feel like you have to, kind of like hold back or something like that. It feels like that would
Right.
make the burnout faster.
Oh
Um,
yeah. And
yeah.
that's a really good point, because it also, when it would cause me to resent the people that I worked with, because it's like, you don't understand that I can't travel out of town, to go get an award or something. It's just
Hmm.
like, that's not a priority on my list. It's great. I will gladly take the award and put it on my CV, but I
Right.
won't be at the banquet. And, I would get like dirty looks and a lot of questions and a lot of like, what the heck,
Yeah.
type of stuff like that.
Judgment,
And
basically. Yeah.
judgment. Yeah, very
Yeah.
good, judgment. And then I would kind of go home and be like, well, I kind of hate Dr. So and so and Dr. So and so because they kind of treated me like a child or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Um, now I'm just kind of, now if I could go back in time to that particular
Mhm.
instance that I was just talking about, I would be way more raw and brutally honest,
Right. Right. Well,
than
and
just being
sometimes
like,
that's
well,
what it takes.
yeah, she can't spend the night with my parents. Ooh, and they're like, why not? Like, I would definitely
Yeah.
throw some knowledge on them
Don't you
today.
think that's such a, yeah, it's like almost like if they just could follow you or shadow you for like a day or two and just like see like how much involvement it takes,
Right.
to care for family. I mean, like my situation, like the more I visited with people, like, oh, you have to use a push button door, but you can't because it's in a corner that you can't reach. Like they don't think about these more serious needs. And
Right.
then you tell them, and it's like, well, oh, like if I knew that, maybe if more people were aware, it would be less of a problem. I don't know. It's
Yeah, and it's always a sticky thing, like the decision to endeavor to share and try to teach people about your life, because just because you decide it and you have faith in it doesn't mean that it's going to produce any kind of results. You're
right.
still gonna you're not gonna I'm not gonna change the world by sharing anything
True.
about my daughter. I don't think. I mean, I think the people I work with are still going to be like, but she's okay, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's never going to end. It's always going to be like that.
That's something that I find really sort of exhausting too, because I
Frustrating.
know
Yeah.
there's so much effort. I mean, just on social media alone, trying to spread knowledge and awareness. And there's, speaking engagements. I know that people with disabilities have gone to schools and tried to share that knowledge, but I'm just like, it feels like such a never ending battle. I mean, it's like grad school. You're never finished. You're never going to have
Right.
everything done that you start. So, I,
And sometimes the work, it just uncovers more ignorance. Like,
that's
I think
true. That's
one of
true.
the, yeah, one that sticks out with me is like a while back when, Shane Burkaw
Hmm.
does a lot of videos and advocacy work too. And like, he still gets, you see the comments, like, or Aubrey Smalls, I don't know if you follow him,
Hmm.
he's a little person, and just the comments like that people leave on his posts. I'm just
Right.
like, what is this garbage? Like, are these people real? I hope I'm
Right.
not sitting next to them anywhere. And
And then some of the
ugh,
questions and interactions, even in real life, that come up, you're just like
right,
we're in a time where I was hoping those things would be minimized, or just a little, like a small incremental change, but there's situations where there's not. And
right.
I mean, that's just, I don't know that that will ever really change. And it probably won't, I don't think.
Yeah, uh I kind of see it now a little bit like that. Like, there are always going to be those people, just like there's always going to be racists.
Right.
There's
Right.
always going to be people who use Christianity as a crutch for hatred. There's always going to be people who, you know, uh, whatever, hate
Well,
immigrants.
they use whatever topic it is to like couch their argument or
Yeah,
something. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And to couch their critical thinking as
That's
well.
right. Right. And
There's
somehow that
a
makes it okay. Right. Like that allows them, gives them permission to
right.
be more closed-minded like that. So yeah,
to be excused
exactly.
because they're not the marked one. They're not the one who's getting, they say, I think it was Paulo Freire and many others have always said the oppressed become the oppressor. So you
Mm,
have these people living in mediocrity who gladly take the upper hand position of like, whatever, whenever they
mhm.
get the opportunity, whenever it feels right.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
that.
to not like identify with the people they judge, right? The
It's a
homeless, the
good point.
disabled,
Yeah,
you
that's a
know.
good point. Yeah, that whole identification side of it is, there's just so many layers of that, I think. And I felt like all of those issues contributed to this, sort of burnout idea that we're talking about is like, you the more you have to explain and the more, and in some ways, in my case, I tried to um, almost like downplay it myself, right? Like when there's all these little extra tasks that I have to do that take 10, 15 minutes, or maybe I'm sitting in a wheelchair that's like causing pressure pain. Maybe I have to change positions every 15 minutes, like there's all these little things that, sort of make the day longer, and
Oh
add
yeah.
to the list of endless tasks, that you're already doing for work or whatever, so it's just this mountain of like responsibility. And I feel like that's something I've worked really hard to sort of cut out, and I've been forced to cut out in some ways. So
Yeah. And it
yeah.
really does, I think with the burnout thing too, is that the additional activities are like they're kind of related to like health and survival. It's not just like brushing your teeth an extra time a day or, you know, changing your socks an extra
Yeah,
time a day. It's like, hey, if I don't reposition myself when I need to, I could get a compression wound. And that actually does kill people sometimes.
right.
Or
And
like,
then
if I don't do trach care or
mm,
breathing treatments or if I suction too hard, but all these things will impact my daughter's health in a profound way to where it's like that pressure of those extra tasks
yeah.
is becomes so much that um you almost look at the other things as like well they'll get done when they get done,
You're
like
forced to prioritize it at that point.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sometimes things just get pushed to the back burner, and
Right, right.
you have to
Yeah.
be okay with that, because that will also cause a lot of burnout. If you're always, because I've been like that too, like where I'm always like, I got to do this, I got to do that, I can't forget this. Nothing can get forgotten.
And you have to
Everything
get
has
it done in that sequence, right? Like it needs to
right.
all be, yeah, yeah, I
Great
agree.
care has to be done after a bath. All these things, these rules that you make up for yourself that can really
Hmm.
make you burn out. Like it can really uh,
Yeah,
drag you down.
I totally agree. I think, to the point where sooner or later, your body's going to respond in a way that you're going to have to change anyway. So it's just like the quicker you
That's
can learn to adjust and, sort of change on the fly and disregard these little tasks that are, I mean, like, why am I even stressed about the order of events, or like if it's taking 10 more minutes, or if I'm up till midnight every night because, you know, whatever. I don't know. It's just you learn to weed out the things that cause you problems, it seems like.
yeah, and like I used to get mad at myself for sleeping until 9 or 10 when I
Right.
could, but now I don't
Right.
because I work at night all night sometimes, and
And
or like
sometimes that's the productive time.
well, or sometimes my daughter's sick and
True. Right.
I
I
don't
mean,
get
that
to sleep.
there's a
Uh,
host of, yeah, of reasons that, you know,
yeah.
we don't have a set routine schedule like,
And
like
that
many.
used to really bother me. It used to make me
Yeah.
really upset that I didn't have a set schedule anymore. Or like with the publication thing, it's like I will get in this headspace where it's like, I have to get this done by
Mhm.
February 1st and get it sent to a journal or I'm going to die.
I feel that. Or
Yeah.
like you have to send in that proposal, that like if you don't send it in by 5, you're going to be panicking because, you're pushing into later hours and trying
Right.
to, you're trying to make it so perfect and fix every little thing with it. So
You want
yeah.
it to be time stamped before 6 p.m. so that you don't look like a
And
slacker.
yeah, and it's so hard. Like deadlines are a strange thing for me still, because sometimes they do lead to productivity and getting things done, but other times I feel like they accelerate the burnout. Like you just feel
Right.
almost dead after you get one deadline met,
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a tricky balance, I think. Um, but yeah, I guess we should probably jump to your surprise question.
Okay. All right. Well, that was a really good question.
So I know we have
I
tangents, right?
yeah,
Obviously.
we'll
But
have more. Okay. So this is kind of a broad question. Describe for me how the challenges and adversity in your life have helped to shape your personal philosophy of life.
wow, that's a deep one. Wow. I mean, the adversity thing has kind of been progressive, I feel like with my particular situation with muscular dystrophy, you're constantly sort of pivoting or readapting, to whatever is around you. And I think in some ways it's interesting. You develop, all of these things like maybe like a certain order of things that you were able to do to overcome it, or like if maybe you're like, well, sort of not metacognition, but you're sort of taking a step back and looking at, well, for example, am I transferring in a way from like my wheelchair to my bed that is negative, or can I optimize it? The whole engineering side too, and I think sort of approaching it with a little bit of creativity. That's kind of one way how I've sort of looked at life, right? Like there's obviously times you have to adapt and change to, whatever's going on. Like, I mean, COVID was a perfect example, right? Like you learn to, in my case, I learned to approach the adversity with more of a, I don't know, like I'm going to somehow figure this challenge out and tinker with it and keep going. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the first initial thought, on that. Um, maybe so. What's your kind of approach to that? Just to give my mind, some catch up time.
Yeah. Well, I would say that it has impacted my personal philosophy just that over time, um, after so many challenges, and I'm not trying to say that like I've had a super duper hard life. A lot of the challenges I've faced have been created by my own self, not,
Same here.
not, yeah, but, you know, just to say that I've, I've become kind of like, I'm okay with like not being the best or like not,
Mm,
I don't care if people think I'm a screw up because I know I'm not, like I just don't really worry as much about
yeah.
those kind of things. But I think like my personal philosophy, I have like a couple of things that I tell myself a
Hmm.
few times every now and then. Maybe this is positive inner dialogue, but I don't think so because
It,
I have to tell myself to think
it
it.
almost feels like a affirmation thing
Yeah.
in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things I tell myself is that it's okay for me to feel like I have to work 3 times as hard as everybody else to prove half as much as everyone else. And that's something that I've told myself for a long time.
Sorry. Yeah.
But that's
But
something I
if
started telling myself a long time ago, like
yeah,
15 years ago, that it was okay for me to feel like that,
yeah,
that it wasn't a pity party, right?
right.
And then another thing that I do is I tell myself, just in this moment, I need to get where I need to be to get to the next place where I need to go. And that
Mm,
could be either minute by minute throughout the day, or it
that's
could
a good
be
point.
like it could be over a long period of time. Like, because sometimes we get into like depression or something, and it's like, when am I going to
Right.
get out of this? But there's always another side to
Right.
everything. And then I guess the final thing that I tell myself is everything is temporary, even the
True.
good
Right.
stuff and the bad stuff.
Well, that's one of those things like no emotion or thought's gonna, be there permanently, right? Like it's gonna pass. So you almost have to just sort of tell yourself like kind of be here in that space for a minute and then it's going to get better, and I think that kind of unlocked something when you were talking. My brain freeze was, I guess, thought out.
Good.
But I think one of my philosophies is, everybody has that sort of 5-year plan, or they tell you to have that for your career or your life or whatever. Like you have to achieve these X, Y, and Z goals by this certain time, and the more I've gone with the progression and the disability, along with just life changes, with other things, I feel like I've learned to sort of appreciate now. Like even tomorrow or next week, like if I can plan and do things in that time frame instead of, having these giant goals, which it's not bad to have the goals. It's just you can't get so caught up in the future. Like I'm never going to get there. I'm not there yet, and I want to be. You're so impatient. Like in my mind, I have to be like, well, no, like you're good. Like
Yeah.
you're going to be doing whatever task this is. I'm going to have my weekly 10 list done by Friday on this topic, or that kind of thing. I've
Yeah.
I've learned to enjoy the small, like short term wins, so to speak. Um, yeah, I think that's more and more that's become the case. In fact, I probably don't look to the future even close to enough anymore. But things change
I
so
don't either.
rapidly. Yeah.
And another thing too that you made me think of is when we do focus so far out, sometimes we deny ourselves things, little joys, because we're like, oh, well, I'll wait and do that one fun thing when I finish my 1 year plan or my 10 year
Right.
plan or whatever. And it's like, or I'm going to wait and go to the beach when I can go to Hawaii. It's like, well,
Hmm.
there's a beach down the road, and you don't have to wait until you finish your 5 year plan to enjoy life, like,
Right. Well, that's
it
kind
is.
of in a way, that's sort of like the American dream, right? Like you get to retirement and then you can do all the things that you were
Yeah.
wanting to do. It's like, no, by the time you do that, like who knows what you're going to have left anyway.
And that's the story that we're sold, right?
Hmm.
Because we're all intended to be efficient workers and contribute to society,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you can enjoy your life when you have a bunch of health problems in your old age and you probably
And
don't like traveling anymore.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes so much sense. I mean, it's things in my case, I think were so out of balance with the burnout situation and everything. It was like, well, I wasn't taking as much time for, relaxing, like breathing, reading outside of like scientific literature, like writing poetry, like all these sort of creative elements that were gone for years. I just think that, you somehow have to bring in that balance to deal with everything else you're doing, trying to be productive and reach your career, milestones and everything. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think, yeah, that's kind of the whole, I think my thought process there. Um, yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good answer. Cause yeah, what I think you and I both kind of agree that it's like slowing down a little bit
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Like
just,
smelling the roses thing that everybody always talks about.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reason why people have said these things for hundreds of years, right?
And that's
Because,
that's why I like your posts so much, especially in well, when it's warmer and stuff, because there's like all these little nature elements, that you bring in, and that's something I feel like I know I had lost that, for years, and sort of regained like just being outside and like just simple, you know, getting out in nature, relaxing, taking pictures of like caterpillars or
yeah,
whatever is
a
going on,
flower or
or
something.
birds,
Yeah.
or yeah, yeah.
And it's funny because, like, I think when I was in the doctoral program in Corpus, I was kind of the same, like, hadn't really gone out and done anything much. And I had a nurse at the house, and she was like, I'll take care of Louisa. You need to get
Hmm.
out of the house. I want to say it was during COVID.
Hmm.
And I
Because
went
that's
to
when
this,
everyone never left their house. Like,
yeah, I went to this park that was like right down the street from my house. And I saw like lizards and fish and birds and all kinds of birds and plants and flowers and driftwood, rocks, hermit crabs.
mhm.
And I was just like, why am I not coming here more often? Like,
Mhm.
this isn't even hard to get to. It's just right here, and it has a paved trail. I don't even have to wear hiking shoes. I can
Right.
just, you know, and so it's just those type of little things that
Hmm.
you can enjoy that are close by, or
Right.
you don't have to take a trip to Yosemite.
Right. Right. I mean, yeah, again, that's like kind of like the short term
Yeah,
small enjoyments, right? Like you
yeah,
can, and it's amazing how little it takes to feel better about it, about
right.
everything.
Yeah,
But yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
Um, okay, well, do you want to get on to the next question
yeah.
topic? Okay,
Sure, I'm ready. I'm ready
all
to be
right.
surprised.
All right. So I know that you sort of pivoted your like degree plans partly due to like your family situation with like COVID, and then they were starting to remove some of those policies, and I felt like during the height of the pandemic, everyone with unique health needs, with disabilities, all of a sudden we were kind of it felt like a little more level playing field because we're all at home, Zooming and whatever.
Yeah.
But to me, it's been kind of weird how quickly universities and even employees have reverted completely back to the way they were. There's no flexibility, and so I'm just like, do you feel like remote or hybrids will that ever be common practice? Is that possible for like our culture and our sort of like, 5-day work week, in person traffic, all of that?
Wow, that's a good surprise question because it's not too it's very practical.
Well, they're all good questions. It's just some need a little bit of, yeah,
More thought. Yeah, I
fleshing
know. I
out.
get that's what I meant. Yeah. I think kind of going back to that, like, there's always going to be two kinds of people in this world, or especially in America, right? Because we're like so bipartisan. Everything is boiled down to
Everything is
two
two.
sides.
Yeah.
Two, this way or this way.
It's the Sith thing from Star Wars. There's only
There you go.
two. Yeah, sorry. I
So
had to go nerd for a second. Go ahead.
that's all right. It's cool. I'm sure that your listeners will appreciate that. But yeah, I think there's always going to be people who think that remote and virtual work isn't real, that it's
Mhm.
not hard enough, that it's too, people are just being lazy. There's always going to be those people. And,
Yeah.
they unfortunately, especially in education, that's the voice that's crying out like, we can't do this virtually. And I
Yeah.
don't think that virtual everything is for everybody. I mean, some
Hmm.
people have a hard time with different learning styles. I don't even know if learning
True. That's
styles
true.
is still a thing or not, but I think people could adjust. Um, the thing that interests me that, and I've gotten way more into this whole like everything is a planned conspiracy to keep the proletariat like in its place.
Mm-hmm.
Like I I almost feel like it's damaging me how much I'm like finding out and how much I'm just, disgusted. But I think that that is where a big part of that push is like for whatever reason, like the rich need us like in domiciles or what, like a silo.
Domesticated. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they
Oh, hey,
want us
Silo.
they want us like in a silo where we're fed a mission and vision statement for an organization that we
Yeah.
buy into. If we're at home working, we might have a little too much autonomy over our
See,
schedule or
yeah.
something. And I know that's real, like, that's
That's such a good point though, because I feel like, you know, in my mind thinking of like a lot of the violence and a lot of the conflict going on and everything, it's you're like, well, is there ever going to be that point, that tipping point, right? Where, you know, kind of the middle class and lower class are able to push the edge and try to equalize everything. But I feel like there's such an effort to be in your own little like bubble, right? You're like going to your regular job, you're going to the grocery store, like, you know, and then you're hiding behind your keyboard, like fueling these fires. But is anything ever going to change? Because everyone's so happy in their little, you know, space. And it's
Because you're
almost like,
supposed to be happy that you just get to go to the grocery store.
and
You
one of
know?
two parties is going to win the election, and then is it going to be 4 years of like, yep, we're back in our little bubble again, and you know, then 4 years later it's time to fight. Like,
Well, I think one thing that, you know, could be said for the time that we're living in is that it's a challenging time. It's a time that many of us have never experienced so much controversy and conflict. But it isn't the first time that it's ever happened. If you look at
true.
like the 60s and the civil rights movement and the
Mhm.
voting movement in the South, people were murdered, you know,
Right.
children, young college students, basically children were murdered by racists who didn't, that was like 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Ago, or more than 40, like 50
Yeah.
years ago. But uh is that people are being more vocal, and I think as a in general
Mhm.
society, the masses, a lot of us, people as are being more vocal. They're like tired of putting up with stuff, and I don't know like how much that can change on a policy level, but at the
Right.
very least you have people who are a little bit, who are grumbling a little more, you know, they're grumbling a little more about these things, and some people are listening. Like, I love seeing how Spotify has never brought their workers back to the office. I think
Yeah.
it's really
Yeah.
awesome. Where my brother works in Austin, they do hybrid schedules. Everyone has a hybrid schedule. They like work from home 3 days a week, work in the
Yeah.
office. In some places, I think it's definitely doable, like in your more progressive areas.
Right.
But then you're always going to have those people that are like,
Everything has to
I
be in
understand.
person, and yeah, like,
And it's funny, and I like the way you brought up like my situation because, and I'll kind of tell the story just real quick. Like
yeah.
when I entered the doctoral program, it was during COVID, and they had just lifted all of the like closures and everything. My daughter was very young at home on a ventilator.
Mhm.
I was terrified to go out and bring COVID back into the house. And they were just kind of like, well, sorry, you know, if you want to do this program, you're going to have to come into class.
Yeah.
And they weren't willing to Zoom for me to attend class by Zoom at all. But then a year later, there was a girl that I went to school with who had elective cosmetic surgery and couldn't come in, and they let her Zoom in for half the semester.
And that was a year later. And they just
Yeah,
like flip.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, because it was a COVID issue with me, I
Yeah.
had to go through disability services. And I
Okay.
was given a you don't check all the boxes, sorry,
Mm.
honey, kind of thing. And with
Mhm.
her, it was like just, it's just a case by case thing that they got to deal with because it didn't have anything to do with COVID.
Right. Right.
So
So
just
because it
like
was
that
just,
kind of stuff
yeah,
burns me
that's
up.
why the whole policy situation is a mess, because I guess in my mind, I thought if we get through this pandemic, if we're not like zombie apocalypse by now, you know, that there'd be some magical like change, like we would go to a 4-day work system, or everything would be sort of hybrid, right? Like, because almost every career or job I feel like has some element that could be,
Could be
you know,
hybrid.
pushed hybrid. So I don't know. I just had these wild dreams, I guess, at this point.
Well, and the other thing is, this is why I went straight for the conspiracy
Yeah,
thing
yeah,
because it's actually more cost effective. Like, you don't have to spend as much money if you're not paying for offices and domiciles for everyone to come and sit in all day. Uh, is that even the right word, domicile? I don't know. I'm
It
gonna Google
sounds close enough, but yeah.
it. Yeah. So the fact that it was such a strong push to bring everyone back to work,
Mhm.
um, is very odd to me. Like, where does that really come from? Are we really part of like this orchestrated idea of like
Yeah.
keeping the man down and like not creating spaces for disabled people? Like, because is that there's obviously some people who don't believe that that's even a priority or something that we should even
Right.
care about.
Right.
And so how did all of that, I mean, it's a powerful thing, it must be. And I know like schools went back to face
Yeah.
because like, I really feel like schools should have tried harder to not, but then it goes back to, well, we're forcing all their parents back to work, so we got to get
Yeah.
everyone back to school. And the whole idea of how schools are compensated for ADA, for
Mhm.
daily attendance, um like nobody wants to change that, right?
Right. Right.
Nobody
Well,
wants to change.
there's got to be some kind of financial factor going on there still, I think, because maybe it's something to do with just like the busy consumer lifestyle, right? Like maybe making everyone go back to the office is somehow feeding the like local economy. I have no idea. Like I just
It probably does, and I also think too it kind of goes back to that, like some organizations and companies and employers probably just want everyone in the same spot because it
yeah,
feels more like contained and like they can control the.
it's way more routine, like
Mm,
just a standard. Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like if COVID would have lasted, it's funny, like it just lasted long enough
It's
for
so
people to
weird.
be like, it's over. Let's go right back
Let's
to
go
what
right
we
back.
were
Yeah.
doing 6 months ago. Like,
And
it's
see, like I
over.
was sitting there like we're finally knocking down some barriers. Like there's major things being put in place that I
Right,
thought, people would never have even considered. And then
right.
they were so ready to just go right back to where they
So
were. And
ready.
yeah, and I mean that's probably books and like sheets of data and things that have to be analyzed to see exactly like, you
Well, and
know,
then there's also like we talk about in education sometimes how like the all the kids who were home during COVID, all in some of these communities like Corpus, where
yeah,
there's tons of domestic violence. And so, like, is it really safe to have these communities where everyone is staying inside their home and no one's keeping eyes and ears on them and their children? That can be
mm,
problematic sometimes.
yeah,
Like, I know when I taught Head Start in Corpus, we had to like inspect the kids
mm,
for like
yep,
bruises and
yep.
cuts and scrapes every day, um, which was part of our community needs assessment because of the alarming rate of domestic abuse in the
And
area.
that's I don't know if you had many parents, well, or if it affected you really with with teaching when you were when the pandemic was going, but I feel like there were all of a sudden all the kids are on cameras, right? Like live cameras, and you can see like there's their family members in the background, and some of them even chime in and start trying to direct like the
Right.
classroom and everything, and it's just it's alarming. I think some of the things that probably were seen and maybe even like sort of brushed under the rug, so to speak. I just
Yeah,
yeah,
because I mean, you think about the way a school is because of FERPA, like a family member can't even go inside of a classroom in a school. I mean, they're not supposed to.
right.
And then now all of a sudden you have the whole class and their family can see everybody's home and all their business and what their living
Mhm.
room looks like and how they scream at each other. So yeah, that
And then with
that
the
would
mics
definitely,
that don't get muted.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. That's all very problematic too, especially for younger grades. Like, I think for little kids, it's probably better not to be virtual. Although I did observe some classes. I observed a kindergarten class during the
Mhm.
pandemic. And I mean, she would just let me hop on her Zoom, and she was a like a she spoke sign language, and she had a lot of deaf students. I can't think of what
Mhm.
that's called, but
Yeah,
so she had a really well-run classroom, and like half of her students were on Zoom, and half the ones who were deaf were like they got to come back in person. And then the other kiddos were on Zoom, and I could see them all there. And she just had like a great little thing set up, worked out. But I know
yeah.
everybody's situation was
Well,
different.
and I feel like for me, all of a sudden it was almost too empowering to be able to be at home, because obviously then I'm like, well, I should be able to double my productivity, but
Oh
still,
yeah,
like the
yeah.
methods and like being able to access things quickly, it was just like for people that do have limitations that keep them from going in person as much. I just feel like if that sort of thing can be open always, because
Right.
or even like I think I saw a video, it was years ago now, but some robot that had like a tablet with a student that logged in remotely, and like the little robot would like follow around with a teacher or class or whatever. But
I've seen that. I can't remember where I saw it, but I have seen
yeah,
that. Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. I feel like approaching technology and policies that allow that kind of creative sort of approach to get, I mean, because some people, that's all they have, right? Like that's their only way to interact with
And I
anybody
think it
else.
kind of goes back to this. We talk about this in education sometimes. It's not always popular, but I particularly like it. So again, back to the two kinds of people. Like you have these people that are like, but that's not the real world. Like this is the real world. Like everything has to be hard and suck, and I have to tell you no, and you have
Well, and
to
they're the ones, like there's
suffer.
either normal people or there's not, and it's like, well,
Well, yeah,
what
and
is
that's
normal?
the mentality of those type of people is that virtual work or being present virtually is not the real world. It's
Right.
not, like you've got to figure out a way to get here in person, or I'm going to consider your presence invalid. Like
Hmm.
it's not real.
It's
And
like
so
second place or second class
it
almost.
doesn't count.
Yeah.
Your presence virtually doesn't count. And so I think that that's just kind of goes back to one of the obstacles of having it open as an option for everything, which it should be. And your virtual presence is just as good as your physical presence, in my
Right.
opinion. And I
Right.
don't have any problem doing things on Zoom. And I always tell my students that. I work with a lot of professors who are like, oh no, that's an important meeting. It has to be done in person. Like, why?
Right. Right. I mean,
Why?
like some of it can be like conference calls still, right? Like that. If we go
Or an
back to like the
email.
old days, yeah. Yeah. It's just
Yeah.
the lack of
The
openness to
the
that. And then, how does it make the ones feel that they have no other option? Like I mean, that makes you
you're not
feel
valid if
inferior.
you have
Yeah.
no other option. Just
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Or like your vote doesn't count as much as a
Right.
normal
Yeah.
person. Yeah.
Didn't they propose some crap? Didn't
That I don't know how close it was to being a reality, but I heard some things about, changing how the votes were, counted based on.
right. And I would just like to bring up that that is something that was done a couple hundred years ago. It's not
Yeah,
new.
right.
Everything that's being done right now is just the same old
It's just, yeah,
redemptionist attitude of
it's
America. Yeah, like
it just never went away.
and there's
I
people
mean,
who believe
yeah.
in democracy and want everyone to have equal rights.
And the
And
more I go along, it's like the more of everything in life is like a spectrum. Everything, there's nothing that's so binary, other than like computer science, right? I mean, like zeros and ones there, but
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
And I
it's
mean, that is a theory too of like how reality is constructed for a lot of people is through binary opposite, with defining things in binaries. Well,
yeah.
it's not this, so it has to be this. Well, it's like this, so it must be this, or it
Mhm.
can't be this, so it has to be this. And your very astute and critical thinking skills have like led you to realize that there's really no binary, like
No.
things are not really binaries. It's all an illusion.
Right. Great. Well, thanks for coming on, and I'll go
Well,
ahead and
thanks for having me. It was
yeah.
hat day. Next time we can wear something else.
We can just start having like a, like a crazy face day or makeup or whatever. I don't know. Go back to like
Yeah, or
homecoming
like,
in high school. Every day
yeah,
was a theme
crazy
day.
sock day.
Hey, yeah, pajama day, that kind of stuff.
Pajamas would be good one time
Oh,
a
and
year.
we could do like random backgrounds too. I was just thinking
That
that
now
could be an
that's
option.
because it is going to be hard to like find different things to do it.
Well,
But yeah,
especially for me
background.
to, yeah. But if we do backgrounds, the sky's the limit there. We can do all kinds of
Yeah,
fun, crazy
yeah,
stuff. Yeah.
that'll be fun. Yeah.
Yeah.